And so global shipping has connected us in a way that almost transportation cost from country to country almost disappears. On an object like a phone, you put that in a 40-foot container, the transportation cost across the ocean is less than a penny. So there's no visible cost associated with that.
Welcome into another episode of Everything is Logistics, a podcast for the thinkers in freight. We are proudly presented by SPI Logistics, and I'm your host, Blythe Brumleve. We've got an awesome guest for you today. His name is Sal Mercogliano. He is the host of What's Going On with Shipping, an infamous channel now over on YouTube, where he's bringing the general public into the eyes of shipping and really responsible for, I think, spreading the general awareness of how important shipping and logistics is as an industry as a whole. But you've also, you're former merchant mariner, you're a firefighter, you're a professor at Campbell University. Like, you've got all of these different things going on. As we were talking before in the show, you've got a lot of plates spinning. So I'm glad you took some time out of the day to come join us on the show. So Sal, welcome in.
Blythe, thanks for having me. I like the phrase infamous. I'm going to go with that. I'm going to stick with that. I like the title.
Well, it's funny. I was just talking to Grace Sharkey of FreightWaves fame, and I told her recently that I'm the president and founder of the Sal fan club. So it feels good to finally get you on an episode of Everything is Logistics. We've talked previously for Spire's Maritime Means podcast. We've talked on, FreightWaves Cyberly programming, but this is the first time you're on Everything is Logistics. And I really want to focus this conversation on just what the hell's going on in the rest of the world and how it relates and why people should care. Because that's a common phrase that I hear is, well, why should I care? It's going on, across the globe. I don't think people really understand how much it affects global shipping as a whole and affects their day-to-day life until the price is reflected at the grocery store. So happy to have you here and kind of break all of these complex topics down for us.
Yeah, I'm happy to talk about it. And like you said, I think, sometimes I think I need to rename my channel to What the Hell's Going On with Shipping, because it just seems like such a mess at times. I joke all the time that we have these, black swan events are supposed to be these rare things, and we just seem to have a flock flying overhead coming down about every month or two.
I know, instead of a black swan, it's now just vultures everywhere, just waiting to come in and clean up. Now, I wanted to, just to sort of give the audience a little bit of sort of a roadmap for the show. We're going to talk about sort of the global history of shipping as a whole. And then we're going to get into some of the Red Sea stuff. And then we're going to get into a little bit about like why that matters and, how folks working within the logistics industry can help their own customers get educated on this topic. Hint, you can just take some of Sal's videos and just send them to them, and that would help them a ton to understand why the rates are increasing. And then we're going to also talk about the growth of his YouTube channel. I believe you were close to 200,000 subscribers, right?
Yeah, just about 180,000 right now.
Amazing. And that's so awesome to watch, sort of your content flourish, because it's such a good sign to the rest of us that are creating content within the logistics industry to know that, like, hey, you can make an impact with the content that you're creating. So let's kick things off with I guess just sort of like, I'm going to ask a lot of dumb questions in this interview.
There are no dumb questions. Remember, I tell my students this all the time. There are dumb answers, but there are no dumb questions. So the way you prevent having dumb answers is by asking questions. So you fire away, Blythe.
Okay, perfect. So my first, I think it's dumb, but I'm just going to ask it anyways. How did global shipping get started?
Well, I think you got to look at modern global shipping. I can take you back to the Romans, but that's a bit far back. But, post World War II, you have this, you vanquish the Germans and the Japanese, and all of a sudden you have the great kind of ocean commons open up. It's something that we have taken for granted now. And matter of fact, what's happening in the Red Sea is a good indication of that. We're seeing it kind of challenged. But all of a sudden, the world's oceans were wide open. And matter of fact, you can sail ships everywhere. There was very few little kind of confrontations. We had issues. There were small conflicts and wars. But for the overwhelming majority, you were able to sail across the oceans, and it didn't matter what flag you flew. It didn't matter what country you were, kind of associated with. You can undertake trade. And what we saw is because of that openness, the amount of goods that moved across the ocean increased. Plus, we had a huge technology change. we had a couple of closures of the Suez Canal, one in 1956 and another one again in 1968. And what you saw was the growth of like super tankers. You went to the ultra large and very large crude carriers. We've seen the introduction of container ships and the ability to modularize cargo so that it can move almost seamlessly from embarkation to debarkation. And what that has meant is that, in 1950, we were moving 500 million tons of cargo, which is an amazing amount. It was unheard of to be able to move that level. Well, last year we moved 12 billion tons of cargo. So we've increased 22-fold over the span of 74 years. And that rate has increased. And what we're seeing is more and more goods moving around. And so global shipping has connected us in a way that almost transportation cost from country to country almost disappears. On an object like a phone, you put that in a 40-foot container, the transportation cost across the ocean is less than a penny. So there's no visible cost associated with that. And what that has done is, for some industries, it's been the death knell. We've seen the demise of certain industries. At the same time, we've seen the ability to purchase goods go up for not just us in the United States, but globally. And we've seen the world, kind of standard of living come up to such a level that you've actually seen in some cases poverty eliminated, because now you can freely move food and minerals and ore, grain, you name it, around the planet, so that it's not unusual to be driving a car that's built overseas. You don't even think about that. You don't think about where your clothes come from. You don't think about any of that stuff because it is virtually seamless. That's what global shipping has given us. It also has been a bit of a problem when all of a sudden that system doesn't work the way it's supposed to.
And so when you talk about what doesn't work, I think a lot of that discussion kind of centers around like the established trade lanes. And I've always wondered, I imagine ocean currents have a lot to do with this, but is it geopolitical as well as to how these trade lanes are established all across the globe?
It is. As a matter of fact, if you look at ancient trade lanes and you superimpose the modern map today, it's kind of the same way. It's kind of the same way if you look at like Roman roads during the Roman Empire, then you put the European highway system on, they're identical. Because you kind of go the same routes. The big difference is the addition of like the Suez Canal and the Panama Canal. But basically trade routes follow where people are. And I saw a map just the other day, it was really interesting, where it looked at where wealth is concentrated in the world, and it's Eastern United States, it's Europe, and it's Eastern Asia. And in truth, those trade lines kind of marry up almost exactly where you see everything go. And it is geopolitical. I mean, when you talk about something like the Red Sea, for example, one of the reasons why the British grabbed Gibraltar, the Suez, Aden, Hormuz, and Singapore isn't because they're beautiful spots. They are, but they're astride these key choke points, these key maritime lanes. And so, controlling them, it's the same reason why you see rest stops where two highways come together. It's you getting the business. This is where the trade's coming. This is where everything is. It's why cities develop on key, geographic areas. Why Chicago is where it is at the bottom of Lake Michigan, because it's railways and canals. It's the same way with trade lanes. You see it. There's a global highway commons that ships pass.
And so really like no matter if it's the ocean or if it's land or does this exist in air as well where certain trade lanes are established?
Oh yeah, it's one of the reasons why you see Ted Stevens Airport in Alaska is one of the busiest airports in the world. It's because people aren't flying into Alaska to fly to Alaska. They're flying there because when you look at the world as a globe, this is where trade intersects from America, Europe, and Asia. It's a good spot. And so you have a big airport there to do a lot of trade. So airports work in that same way. Shipping works in that same way. And you can see that on, if you pull up a marine traffic map and you look at where ships are sailing, you can see those big arcs going across. That's because the world's not flat. It's a big round thing. And so, that's the way the trade moves. And when you have issues at those spots, they can create a lot of problems. And it's one of the reasons why the Red Sea raises issues. It's why when you have low water in the Panama Canal, that raises issue. When you have pirates in the Straits of Malacca, that creates issues. And so, it's very important to be conscious. And when you hear about disruptions in those areas, understand this is coming your way. It's only a matter of time, but you'll eventually see it manifest itself in either something you're shipping or something you're buying.
So if there's issues in, so say for, example, the Suez Canal, where, historically there have been issues there, there's been an area of conflict for a very long time. How difficult is it to just build like a Panama Canal all over the world, like different Panama canals? I imagine that's a huge undertaking, but it is, if that's such a security threat, why isn't there investment in these other lanes and these other areas?
Yeah, I mean, you hear that now. The people are talking about what's called the Ben Gurion Canal, this parallel canal through Israel. You hear about a Nicaragua canal. You're hearing about the building of the Kra Peninsula Canal across Thailand. So there's always interest in it. The problem is economics. Is are you going to be able to justify the economics for it? Suez was a very tough prospect. It took a lot of money. It took the combined effort of Britain and the United Kingdom to do that. It was a 10-year project. A lot of people died creating the Suez Canal. Same thing with the Panama Canal. The British and French tried to create that. They failed at doing it. It took the Americans to do it. And most recently, probably the best example of this is in 2016 when you opened the new lane of the Panama Canal. The Panama Canal was constrained for 100 years by the size of the locks. So, that was it. You had to fit the locks to go through. And the problem is by the early 2000s, ships are getting bigger. They're much bigger. And there was a big issue. And China was talking about building a kind of a canal through Nicaragua, which would allow larger ships to go through. It's what convinced the Panamanians, like, we have to update our canal. And so they undertook it. It was a big program to do it. There were a lot of problems because they kind of rushed it. So there was some issues with cement and some of the locks mechanisms. And you can see it kind of manifest itself today with water issues because the new locks use a lot of water, a lot more than they expected. They're not recycling as much as they hoped to. And now we're being kind of, that rush to develop the new lane of the Panama Canal is having the issue that now you're only getting 2/3 of the ships through the canal that you normally do in a given year.
And so I guess staying on the Panama Canal situation for a minute, is that something that is solvable, or they're just sort of waiting at the, I guess waiting for Mother Nature to sort of, dump a bunch of rain?
Well, every member of the Panama Canal Association is out every day doing a rain dance. I guarantee you that. So they're all doing whatever they can to get rain into the Panama Canal. Understand, right now you're heading in the dry season, and the lake, the Gatun Lake, and it's a freshwater canal. Most people are sitting there going, well, ocean rise. Like, ocean rise has nothing to do with it. This is a freshwater canal. You got to get up over a hill. It's got to get over an 85-foot hill. And so that's what you need to keep the lake going. When they built the new lane of the canal, they'd actually thought about this. They actually knew that, okay, these locks are going to be huge. We're going to dump a lot of fresh water into the ocean. And so they built these what are called reclamation ponds. They were going to recycle water. And they envisioned they would recycle about 80% of the water. You can't just dump the water back into the lake because of the salt water and issues. But what happened is the reclamation isn't working as efficiently. They're only getting 50%. But the other half of the water they're losing is from the old locks, and they haven't done anything with the old locks. And so now Panama is looking at a couple of things. Number one, improving the reclamation process, maybe reclaiming the water from the old locks, and more importantly, building some more dams and retention to build up the water reservoir on Gatun Lake. All of that is great for the future. It does nothing right now for the next 6 months. And so what they have had to do is number one, cut back on the number of ships going through. And they've had to lighten the load of the big ships coming through. Understand the new locks were tremendous tremendous change. Prior to 2016, the biggest container ship you could bring through was about 4,500 boxes. Now you can bring through 16,000. So it's, in matter of fact, one of the things that happened was after the supply chain crisis of the 2020s, in LA and Long Beach backed up, a lot of shipping companies sat there and said, well, I'll go through the Panama Canal and we'll go directly to the East Coast and the Gulf Coast, right where the population is. Cuts out warehousing in the Inland Empire, cuts out drayage, cuts out Class 1, cuts out California, which a lot of people like. So you go right into some environments. And then when they had the issue with the Panama Canal, they said, well, no worries. We'll just go west. We'll go through the Suez, because the distance is almost the same. And they started doing that until the Red Sea blew up in their face. And now we find ourselves in this kind of global kind of maritime choke point disaster.
Do any of these maritime choke points exist elsewhere in the world besides these two locations?
Oh, yeah. I mean, Straits of Gibraltar, you have one. You can see it in the Malacca Straits and down in Singapore. You can see it in the English Channel coming in, the Baltic, the Black Sea is the other big one, obviously, where the Turks have the control over the Dardanelles and the Bosphorus, which has been significant because of Russia-Ukraine going on since 2022. There's the Bering Sea as the Arctic becomes much more open and used. You get the Bering Sea between Russia and the United States. There's other small ones around the world. On the Great Lakes, we saw a strike by the Canadian lock workers. So all of a sudden, ships couldn't get off the Great Lakes because the Soo locks were closed, and so you have a lot of little choke points around. But for big ones, I mean, it's Panama, it's Suez, it's Gibraltar, it is Malacca Straits. Those tend to be the really big ones, and of course, the Taiwan Straits is another one that has a lot of issues between China and Taiwan.
Now, I've heard you mention the word locks a few times now. What is that in reference to?
So the two canals are different. So Suez Canal is a straight shot. You sail into Suez and you come out in Port Said in the north. You just sail straight. It's 100 kilometers. It's the ditch. It's what that's referred to. You sail through the ditch. In Panama, you got to go in locks. And what locks are a series of gates. So you bring your ship into the first gate and you pump it up with water, and you get up to the second gate, you get up to the third one, and now you're up on the lake. And then the same thing, you got to stagger down. And so locks change your elevation. They lift you up or lower you down. And you see that in multiple places. So for example, if you're coming off the Great Lakes into the Atlantic, because you can do that, you come off the Great Lakes, go through the locks, and go all the way out into the Atlantic, you're coming up from a huge distance. I forget what it is, several hundred feet up off the Great Lakes. And so you got to stage down that entire path. And so we see these processes to do this, to bring them in. And even some ports around the world have gates and locks to keep the water up because of the tide. And, Liverpool is one of the most famous ones. You come into Liverpool, you come in behind the gates and the locks, and the water will just empty out.
And so I was getting into the Red Sea part of this conversation, which I imagine is something that feels really complicated to me. I think a lot of this news started breaking around the holidays, and it was one of those things where it's like, I know I should pay attention to this, but also I need a break. So can you kind of catch us up on what the hell's going on in the Suez Canal?
So the Red Sea actually isn't very complicated, and that's the thing about this is it's very straightforward. So you have this conflict between Israel and Hamas in Gaza. So this is the old Middle East. This is the two-state solution. You had a very ruthless attack by a terrorist group named Hamas out of Gaza. This is an area that's inhabited by Palestinians. And Israel has in turn basically attacked the Hamas, and they've invaded Gaza. And the Israeli attack on Gaza has been very polarizing because of the scale, the deaths of innocent people. And it has polarized the region in multiple ways. The Houthi, who are a faction in a civil war that's been going on now for over a decade. So you got a three-way civil war in Yemen. Houthi own the western part of Yemen, and this is the part right along the Red Sea. The Red Sea is the connector between the Mediterranean through the Suez out into the Indian Ocean. So the Red Sea is this 1,000-mile long, skinny little body of water. And at the end, you have these two choke points. You have the Suez in the north, and then you got something called the Bab el Mandab, the Gate of Tears, in the southern end. And that's right where the Houthi are. So all the ships come down to this narrow little gate. Well, the Houthi, who have done this in the past, started to target ships. Now, they've done this periodically. They have targeted ships. They'll throw a missile or a boat or something at it to get attention. What they announced was, in solidarity with Hamas, we're going to attack Israeli-owned, Israeli-flagged ships. And what happened was they, in a very dramatic fashion, they staged a helicopter assault onto a car carrier. Everyone has seen that kind of video on the Galaxy Leader. They seized this ship, and then they started launching missiles and a variety of drones and guided missiles and ballistic missiles. But what has happened is the Houthi have kind of ramped up their attacks. So initially it was against Israeli ships. Then they started hitting other ships. And then they said, well, we're going to hit any ship that's connected to Israel. And then they started hitting ships that have nothing to do with Israel. Then they started saying, well, we're going to look at any connection in the past. And basically, they're not that very good at shooting at things. And so they're just hitting ships. And what happened was one of the leading container liners in the world, Maersk, said, okay, this is dangerous. We're going to pull our ships back. So when you sail through a war zone, you have to have something called war risk insurance. So just like, if you drive your car, you're covered for everything you normally do. If someone, if you decide to drive your car through a war zone and gets blown up, the insurance company is not going to cover that. They're going to sit there and say, you probably shouldn't have done that. But you can get war risk. And war risk insurance is this kind of almost like flood insurance on a house, an extra thing. Initially, it was very low. It's like 0.02% of the value of a ship, which was a couple of $1 million. But then as the attacks increased, the rate increased and it got up to about 0.7%. Now we're at 1%, which isn't a lot. If you have a ship like a tanker or a bulk ship carrying oil, you're talking about maybe tens of millions of dollars worth of value. So 1%, you're talking about $100,000. That's still economically feasible to sail through. When you have a container ship carrying 20,000 boxes, you're talking about anywhere from 100 million to $250 million worth of cargo on board. And now you're talking about $1 million to $2.5 million in insurance, if you can get the insurance. And so what we saw happen was the big container lines started backing off. And then there were efforts to restart the trade. The attacks escalated. The US decided to counter that by striking at the Houthi. They have since expanded their strikes backwards. And now what you have is a situation where about half the normal tonnage that would go through the Suez Canal is not going through. Instead, they're heading around Africa. And what most people don't realize, because they look at flat maps, is Africa is a big honking continent. It's massive. It's tremendous. It's 3,500 miles around Africa. And, Greenland, which looks really big on a map, actually like a 14th the size of Africa. It's tiny. But Africa, it takes you 7 to 10 extra days to go around. And that's an extra $1 million at least in fuel, port costs, crew costs, charter rates, you name it. It's really expensive. And what this is doing is displacing trade. And now ships that were supposed to be arriving on schedule in Europe or heading back to Asia aren't, because they're still transiting. And what this does is it creates a butterfly effect throughout the supply chain. Because now what you're seeing is cargo is delayed getting into Europe. So for example, a very, very high vis story was Tesla had to shut down operations in several German plants because the parts they needed are on a ship going around Africa. So that's creating a problem. So that's creating a big problem for them. So what you have to do now is delay, and what we're seeing is escalating freight rates. So go back to 2020 when we saw what was happening in LA and Long Beach. Well, we just saw in the past week the fastest escalation of freight rates ever. Now, we're not up to 2020 levels by any means, but if you look at a chart showing those freight rates, it looks like it's like a rocket going off right now. And what that means is you're going to see higher costs in Europe. We're going to start seeing it in America very soon, because 30% of that cargo that's going from Asia to Europe gets put on different ships and sailed across to us. And then we're going to see it on the backside because empty containers aren't getting back to Asia on time, which means that those containers aren't being packed. They're not going to get out before the Chinese New Year. So we're going to see delays hitting the West Coast. So all of this, and again, this all stems from Israel, Gaza.
So I have so many questions. Okay, but first I want to ask, for the Houthis, why now? This war has been going on for a decade in Yemen, this civil war, why now are they choosing to start just attacking any ships that aren't Russian or Chinese?
The Houthi are literally appalled by what's happening in Israel. They see the destruction of Gaza and the deaths of thousands of Palestinians as something they associate with. They're in solidarity. They actually have a fairly, I don't want to say noble cause, but they have a justification for wanting to be on the side of the Palestinians. I think their actions are uncalled for, because what they're targeting is innocent ships and mariners. And what they're basically doing is, okay, how do we express our solidarity? We can, we can get a GoFundMe page. We can do that. What are we going to do? It's not going to get a lot of attention. What gets a lot of attention is when you start disrupting global trade. And what's scary about this scenario, and why it should be higher on everyone's radar, is the Houthi are a faction. They're a faction in a three-way civil war. They are not a powerful entity at all. Yet with a handful of drones, guided missiles, and ballistic missiles, a lot of these are hand-me-downs from Iran. They have now interdicted 11% of the world trade. They're causing Egypt to go through a financial bankruptcy potentially because half of the normal toll that the Egyptians will get in a year aren't going through. This represents about 5 out of $10 billion that the Egyptians get every year through the Suez Canal. That goes into their operating fund for their country. Their budget is only $100 billion. So they're talking about losing 5% of their budget. Uh, Not alone the fact that we're seeing freight rates increase, inflation, port congestion. The Houthi, for getting attention, are getting a great return on investment. For several $1,000 drone, I am causing billions of dollars worth of headache for the West, which, by the way, openly support Israel in this bombing attack, while at the same time decry Russia for doing a similar thing in Ukraine. And so if you're the Houthi, you're doing this. And what should really be of concern for everybody is if the Houthi can do this, who else can do this? And what happens when a true nation state who has resources and material and capability decide to interdict trade? And that's one of the reasons why you saw the United States and several other nations decide we got to get in there and try to diffuse this.
I think it's also from what I understand, it's a economic imbalance as well because the Houthi drones and the missiles are very cost effective, like sometimes as low as a few $100s, a couple $1,000s even. Whereas like the U.S. when they're battling against them are using like $2 million missiles. So that doesn't seem like it seems like something is gonna break and bend.
Yeah, I mean, the Houthis have realized that what they can use. Now, we haven't had any casualties yet. We've had ships hit, but nothing serious yet. I mean, they've been damaged to ships, but nothing serious yet. But again, it's they're using weapons that for a long time you had heard people say, well, you can't use ballistic missiles, these high trajectory missiles against ships unless they're very sophisticated. There's a big debate whether the Chinese had the capability to hit a ship moving at sea with these things. Well, the Houthi are doing it, and they're doing it in a way that works. They send drones over to spot. They have people in boats and on small islands. They have the Iranians helping them out in the area. And so they're able to do this. And you're right. Every time we shoot a standard missile, which is a $2 to $4 million missile, to shoot down a $200,000 drone, in terms of investment, it's the Houthi are winning. But the Houthi are winning because they're causing billions of dollars of economic displacement right now. And their argument is, you want this to end, then tell Israel to back out of Gaza. And if you create enough economic hardship, then maybe that works. I don't know if people are going to back off on this, but that's what the Houthi logic is. And it's very hard now to go to the Houthi and negotiate with them. They're not doing this for monetary reasons. They're doing it for ideological reasons. And ideology is tough. The only way you can push the buttons on the Houthi is their backers, and that's Iran. But the problem is Iran has ramped up attacks too. We've just seen Iran attack targets in Iraq. They just attacked targets in Pakistan, which is unheard of. And so this is really escalating in a way that most people are getting a little concerned about. As a historian, I get little World War I vibes, little tiny, small, little regional conflicts that morph into a larger, big one.
Now, a couple questions here. Why would Iran attack Pakistan related to this issue? And then why isn't, if Egypt stands to lose, 5% of their annual budget, why aren't they doing more?
So Egypt is the easiest one to answer because Egypt has got a problem. Because if Egypt goes down and smashes the Houthi, the fear is they're seen then to be pro-Israeli. And Egypt has got a lot of problems with the previous political party, the Muslim Brotherhood within Egypt. Plus, Egypt shares a border with Gaza, and so the fear they have is if they anger the Hamas, then Hamas turns their missiles from bombing Israel to bombing the Suez Canal, in which case they lose everything from the Suez Canal. And so the Egyptians have got to play a very delicate role. The Pakistanis and Indians, in particular, too, have really reacted to several attacks by Iran on shipping in the northern Arabian Sea. There have been 2 ship attacks perpetrated by Iran. And both the Indian Navy has come out in force. The reason the Indian Navy is out in force is because Indian crew members make up a lot of mariners out there. So they're coming out to protect their crew members. Pakistan is targeting what they see as insurgents in their country being funded by Iran. And so you have this. And so what if you got a map of this region and you start making arrows, who's involved, it's going to look like, a 5-year-old, doing finger painting, because it's going to involve everybody in some way.
And now another aspect that I heard is, and I correct me if I'm wrong, but like the French are the only European country that are helping out as far as protecting some of these ships because there are still ships going through the Suez Canal. They're just doing so with protection.
Yeah, so this is where you get this weird other element here. So the U.S., the U.S. does what U.S. does. It announces an operation, Operation Prosperity Guardian, which tells me that the Pentagon uses ChatGPT to come up with code names. But they announced this operation where we're going to protect shipping, and they say, hey, we're going to get all these nations involved, and so they got nations to sign on, but it was very slow in getting up and running. And so several countries, France particularly, sat there and said, well, we're going to start escorting our ships. France has a huge container line, CMA CGM, which operates out of Marseille. CMA CGM said, listen, we're not connected to Israel at all. Some other container liners were connected. So, for example, the Houthi targeted Mediterranean shipping, MSC. The wife of the owner of MSC has dual citizenship in Switzerland and Israel. So that was enough for the Houthi. So they targeted them. Maersk has an alliance with Zim, so they targeted Maersk. But CMA CGM was wanted to keep their ships going through. And so the French have a frigate down there. They did the escorting going down there. But it changed when the U.S. initiated the attack. Now, the American commander down there, an admiral by the name of Brad Cooper, who's the commander of the Fifth Fleet, said, okay, the defensive operation is separate from the offensive operation. But that's kind of a hard line to draw when the same ships are involved in the operation. And so now what you're seeing is you still have the Americans and the British guarding vessels in the Red Sea. But the French, the Italians, the Japanese, they're helping when they can, but their focus is to escort their own ships through. And so they're doing a lot of individual escorts. The strange part about all this is that the largest reinsurer for war risk announced the other day that they may no longer issue war risk insurance for US and British owned ships, which means that you may no longer see US and British owned ships going through the Red Sea, which means that the US Navy and the British Navy are going to be guarding ships that are not their own. And the ships that are going through in large numbers now are Russian and Chinese vessels. The strangest thing is the Chinese are providing perhaps the best protection for vessels because all you got to do is on your AIS is sit there and say, I'm a Chinese company or I'm a Chinese ship or I have a Chinese crew on board or I don't know, I'm eating Chinese. I don't know enough. If you put something Chinese in there, you can get protection because the Houthi don't want to anger the Chinese. And so they're able to get through. And same thing with the Russians. Now, I think behind the scenes, the Russians and the Chinese are playing with the Iranians to, give the Houthi information. So not as attack ships, because initially there were some Chinese and Russian ships hit. They're getting a little better at that now. But I definitely do think that there's a lot behind the scenes that we're not seeing.
Why wouldn't the Houthis want to attack any why wouldn't they want to anger the Chinese? Is it strictly because of the Russia Iran alliance?
I think it's because of alliances that are going on, the fact that there's a lot of oil trade from Iran to China right now. And China is a big geopolitical player. They like the application of soft power. They're not the Americans who like to shoot a missile here. They like to apply kind of pressure, below the scenes. So China has a big influence in the region through their Belt and Road Initiative. They're doing a lot of infrastructure and building in the area. The only Chinese overseas naval base in the entire planet is in Djibouti at the very end, right across from the Houthi. So the Chinese have been there for a long time. They've been doing these anti-piracy patrols for a long time. So, there's a lot of infrastructure and China's got the money to help people, they can make things happen. And so, I think China's been able to exert a lot of influence in the area behind the scenes. And I think this is the big misconception the U.S. is making. They think there's a military solution to this. And I don't think so. The Houthi have been bombed by Saudi Arabia for a decade and they haven't given up. And I think we're very good at blowing things up. We're really great at that when we do it repeatedly, but you can't blow everything up. And I think we lose the image that the persons we have to convince to sail through this area isn't the Houthi, it's the insurance companies. And if I'm an insurance company, I am not taking the chance that one missile or one boat comes loose and sinks a $250 million container ship, and I have to pay that out because the liability associated with that is going to be catastrophic. And there's no way that the shipping companies are going to be able to do that.
Why wouldn't some, I guess, I watch a lot of action-packed movies. And I'm just thinking to myself, well, if all of this is going on with a small fraction of, a terrorist group, and I would imagine is it the Houthis are a terrorist group, I guess technically
They've
classified.
just been redesignated as a terrorist group, although they have 30 days until it goes into effect, so they can like move all their cash and money in the meantime. So we
Interesting.
again we're not being very effective in declaring groups terrorists. But go ahead.
Well, I did see that it was a strongly worded letter that
It
was
was.
sent to them, and so I was like, well, if the maybe the strongly worded letter doesn't work, why wouldn't the Americans just go in and kind of bomb them away? Like I
Well,
don't
again, what's preventing us from sending Vin Diesel and the entire crew in and fixing
expendables
this up,
crew.
and getting this fixed up is number one. I mean, if you're the Biden administration, number one, you've had a bad track record with land engagements following Afghanistan pulling out. You've got a political, you got a big thing called an election coming up in November. Do you really want to go back into the Middle East and land there and start committing forces again? It would make the most sense because if you look at the piracy issue back in the 2000s and 2010s, what fixed the piracy issue wasn't naval patrols. It diminished it. It reduced it. But what changed it was the African Union going into Somalia in 2017 and eliminating the nest of pirates. That's what did it. When you look at the U-boats in World War I, World War II, what defeated U-boats wasn't the Navy. We suppressed them, but they were still sinking ships to the last day of the war. What ended them was the war on land. But again, you don't have a desire for the Americans to put a battalion of Marines ashore in the region for fear that we're going to get sucked into that and not out of it again, especially by November for a presidential election.
So if I'm a merchant mariner on one of these ships that does decide to take all of the risk and go through the Suez Canal, what does that look like? Am I armed, walking up and down the ship? What does that, I guess, sort of situation look like?
So through my channel, I had the opportunity. I had a batch of merchant mariners who sailed through this region contact me, and it's been really interesting to hear them. So a batch of them went through on January 9th. This is the big battle that was fought that kind of triggered the American reaction. Huge, massive convoy battle. And, three things stood out in all the conversations with all the mariners from the ships. Number one, they said it was unbelievable. They used a specific word. It was a blank show. It was like there was so much going on. It was like insane. It was like being in a movie, but you weren't in a movie. And it was like 3 hours of nonstop of missiles and combat going on. They said the second thing was it was really disorganized in some ways. A lot of the ships had embarked security detachments, private security detachments. So a very common thing that had happened during the piracy period is you'd bring on these armed guard detachments. Commercial ships can't have weapons. You're not allowed to go into port. We're not going to allow a ship from a foreign flag with foreign crew coming into New York loaded to the gills with machine guns. So what happens is these ships meet small boats, these offshore supply vessels, and what comes on board is an armed security team. They bring the weapons, they bring the crew, they get on board, they ride the vessel through the contested waters. And at the other end, they meet another boat, they offload to that boat, and then that crew gets on another ship and goes the other way. And they do that, they do like several weeks doing that, those crews. And you pay for that. You pay for that. Initially, it was very lucrative. Now they've farmed this out to getting kind of foreign workers to do it, and they get people from foreign militaries in to do it. Well, that works great against four Somalis in a speedboat with AK-47s. Doesn't work when you have drones and missiles coming at you. You got to have the Navy on board to do that. And what you're seeing is the Navy is providing protection. The U.S. Navy and the British Navy, in particularly, have basically stationed their warships between the main shipping channel and Yemen. And they're working almost like skeet shooting. The skeets are coming overhead, the drones and the missiles, and they're knocking them out of the air. And the problem that the insurance companies has is that's great, but you got to prove me 100% you're going to knock everything out of the air. And that's difficult to do because things are going to get by. And that's the report I got, is that every now and then missiles would get by. And fortunately, these aren't the most sophisticated missiles. But when you have one blow up a few hundred yards off the bow of a vessel, it wakes you up. And so it's harrowing. And then you have shipping companies where the shipping with a cruise on board sit there and say, hey, we're risking our lives. How about a little extra money here? And they asked for war risk pay. Maersk announced when Maersk was going to send their ships through, they were going to double the wages, which sounds great, but it's a week worth of double salary. It is a drop in the bucket of what the profits they're making. And yet some shipping companies aren't willing to do it. Matter of fact, the American companies are not willing to pay the double wage for the crews to go through, which is, I think, is a huge problem for me. It's like these guys are getting, and women are getting shot at. And, it's by hook or crook they're not getting hit. So it does create problems because when you sign on a ship again and they sit there and say, well, where am I going? Well, you're going to the Red Sea. It's like, well, no, I'm not, because I'm not going to sign on because I don't have to take this job. I have options. I'm not in the
I was
military.
going to say, is that can they know, I guess, sort of the route ahead of time and be able to give a permission, like, yes, I'm willing to risk it versus no, or you just find out?
Sometimes they do. There's a company in the United States that actually transports fuel to Israel. Under a State Department contract, we provide Israel with high octane fuel for jets and military. And so State Department charters a tanker and they sail it in. And during the period of the attack, there was a big debate. It's like, you want us to sail into a port in Israel during rocket fire. It's like, okay, and we're going to be pumping high octane gasoline. It's like, okay, I think I want something in return for that. It's like a little bit something extra for it. And there was a lot of debate. They actually had to have negotiating about it and everything. And it seems, it makes the crews look bad because, like, well, they're holding out for money and everything. But in truth, they want to be paid for their services. And they're taking a risk. And, they expect just compensation for that.
So, and you just brought up Israeli ports. Are those still operational during
Oh, yeah.
all of this that's going on?
Yep. The main ports are up and running. We've seen some issues. There was a big problem actually at the very beginning because when Israel, everybody in Israel is in the Israeli Defense Force. You don't have a choice. Turn 18, you're in the Israeli Defense Force. And matter of fact, you're in the Israeli Defense Force for years in the reserves. They called up reserves, so a lot of people in supply chain got yanked out to go in, because if you think about who's in supply chain, a lot of times, a lot of young people, a lot of dock workers, a lot of people in the offices doing the clerical work, a lot of the administrators, they got yanked out. And so they had a big problem for a while there where everything slowed down in the ports. They wanted to be efficient. It's like, I want to bring a ship in and pull it out real quick. Well, I can't because 3 of my crane operators are not here because they're at the front lines. And so Israel actually had to change some things. They had to release some people, get them back into some critical jobs. It was very similar to what we saw in world wars where people got drafted out of crucial jobs. So yeah, the ports are still open now. Not as many ships coming in from outside of Israel because there's a fear. There was a ship that was targeted going through by the Houthi, a ship called the Maersk Hangzhou, and it was not Israeli owned, not Israeli linked at all, but the ship had been in Israel back in October. And the Houthi says, "Oh, that's a target." And so, so there's a lot of people who are saying they don't want to be target, even have any connection going into Israel right now.
So how do you see this kind of playing out? Or is it just you have no idea at this point how
Well,
to
CEO
determine?
of Maersk came out, Vincent Kirk, and he sat there and said, "There's going to be months, at least months. We're seeing. Understand, Blythe, if tomorrow the Houthis say, you know what, we've realized the error of our ways, the straits open, everything goes back to normal, it's going to take a month or two to reset everything. It's you've already got the disruptions going on, and so we're definitely seeing several months out. The problem is most people haven't seen this yet because the delays and the cost haven't really hit the U.S. yet. You're going to see at the end of January, early February, at the earliest, where we're going to start seeing this start pick up. And the other problem you have is shipping will adapt to this. We'll go around the southern end of Africa. We've done it before. Suez Canal was closed for 8 years from 1967 to 75. We will go around it and make it happen, but it's going to cost. And what's really significant right now is the container liners are in a really good position because they have excess ships and their freight rates were so low coming into 2024. If you read all the forecasts for 2024, like in November or October, it's like, oh yeah, bad year for the container companies. It's really bad. Now they're revising forecasts. Their profitability is up because they're using extra ships. They're getting higher freight rates and they're getting a percentage share off that. So everything's looking better. So I don't. There's some interesting forces at play here that don't want to fix this. They don't want to say it out public, but it's really hard because the Houthi, again, are ideological. You can throw every missile the U.S. Navy has at them. You can land the Marines. You can do everything. It's not going to stop them from hurling a missile every now and then. You got to convince the insurance companies that is easier. So if you look at the scenario right now that's going on in the Black Sea, so just use the Black Sea. When Russia blockaded Ukraine. They cut Ukraine off from exporting grain. You had a deal that was brokered by Turkey to do this Black Sea grain initiative. You started seeing the grain come out. Then Russia withdrew from it, and the reasons Russians withdrew is because the Ukrainians were being very effective at sinking their ships. And so the Russians said, "Okay, we're pulling out of this. We don't like this deal." But the Ukrainians sat there and said, "No, we're going to keep running ships in," and they have. And what you've seen happen is it's gotten safer for them to do it. And what we're seeing is the war risk insurance has come down. It was up at 3%. It's now at 1.25%. And, they're showing normalization. Hey, the attacks are not happening. They're not as frequent. They're not severe. And that takes time. And that's the problem, is it's going to take time to convince the insurance companies that, listen, you don't have to worry about the catastrophic loss of a vessel. But again, it's all going to be a matter of what works best on the balance sheet for the companies.
I'm not sure if you know the answer to this, but what goes on in sort of the insurance sort of war rooms? How are they analyzing this? Do they have, sort of experts from all over that are, providing insight and consulting them on what they should do? Like, what does that look like from their end?
They hire the person who has the worst case environment, the most dismal, the person who's got the dourest personality you can imagine, to think, the worst pessimist in the world. That's an insurance broker. He's like, okay, how bad can this be? And it's still not the worst. I'll give you the best example I ever heard. So insuring a container ship like Ever Given, they got stuck in the Suez. The worst case scenario they came up to insure that vessel was, okay, what's the worst thing could ever happen to a ship like the Ever Given? And they said, okay, we got it. Ever Given runs into a passenger liner and kills everybody. That's the worst case scenario. The ship sinks, the passenger liner sinks, and you killed 5,000 passengers. What's the payout on that? What's the economic payout on that? And they said, okay, that's what we got to insure against. That's the worst case scenario we got to insure against. And what's interesting is I talked to some insurance people afterwards, and they said, yeah, we didn't think worse enough, because Ever Given was worse than that. Because we didn't kill anybody, but the worst thing was we made 450 ships late. And now the liability for those 450 ships worth of cargo is more than we ever envisioned. So yeah, they're doing the worst case scenario, because again, it's not just the loss of the cargo. It's not just the loss of the ship. It's not the loss of the crew. It's the environmental damage. What happens when all of a sudden you have this massive oil spill in the Red Sea, which is basically a huge tidal basin? The water doesn't go in and out of the Red Sea too much. So you've killed fishing, you've killed the coastline, you've killed everything. That's the scenario you start getting into. And it's really hard to get them to start coming down. What you have to do is show that they're going to make enough revenue. I mean, because this is the other thing too. If war risk is so high, no one's going to go through. You're not going to make any money. So you're kind of killing yourself at the same time. So they want to make money, but they want to minimize the downside. What's that sweet spot and everything? Why is it that when you automatically turn 25, you're a better driver than you were when you were 24 and 355 days? I don't know what the difference is. You're kind of the same person, but in terms of insurance, you change dramatically. And that's kind of what they're looking at.
So if we bring it back, to the state side, people who are working at the ports, people who are working in brokerage offices, and they're responsible for communicating some of this information to their customers. How do you even advise them, or would you advise them to explain, maybe this is why you're going to have a rate hike on your shipments in February?
Yeah, it's so funny as I started talking about this really early. I was talking about this in October and November, and I had some viewers on my channel send me some notes. It's like Sal, thank you. I was the smartest person in the room the other day, because I talked about this, and it has come to fruition. We're seeing the rate heights, and we're seeing this. So we planned ahead. So I told everyone we got to start pushing forward some cargo. So I'll give you one of the things that's happening right now is this. So you've got these big, again, ships coming from Asia. They're going through the Panama Canal. They're loaded down with cargo. They can't load down all the way, so they got to offload some of it in Panama, rail it across, pick it up, go to the eastern Gulf Coast, offload. But now that ship is largely empty, heading back to Asia. They don't want to send that ship back through the Panama Canal, because that takes a transit away from a loaded ship coming the other way. So they're sending that ship now back to Asia around Africa, and that's a longer haul back. And this is going to delay goods coming back in. So if you're backhauling something to Asia right now, it's going to take a lot longer than you planned for. So you got to, one of the things I think that I hope people got from the supply chain crisis back in the early 2020s is, okay, you got to diversify. You got to be looking at multiple. If you're just coming into one port, if everything you own in life comes in through Los Angeles and you're still doing that, you should have learned a lesson, because this is not boding well for you if you're counting on this, because it only takes one thing to throw a monkey wrench into it. If you are now bringing in, is like, I can come into Los Angeles, or I can come into Savannah, I can come into Houston, I could come into Charleston, I can come into Norfolk, come into New York, I am in a much better position. I can call an audible and change the play up. My playbook isn't carved in stone, and I'm gonna be Alabama and run up the middle every time and lose against Michigan, which still haunts me. Blythe, it haunts me a lot. But anyway, you got to be able to have that ability to play, and so that's why I think is need. This is why you can't be doing your own logistics. You got to have professionals who know this, who saw this happen, and now are realizing that, and they're getting ahead. I just sat in on a freight seminar by one of the freight forwarders. Really good, really top notch. They're watching the shipping. They had a good handle on it. They're talking to the operators. They're talking to shipping firms. They're communicating to everybody. It's like, hey, this is Q1 is going to be different than what we thought of. So for Q2, you got to start planning ahead a little bit more. That Chinese New Year is going to cause more of a disruption than we thought, because not everything's going to be here before that. So make preparations for that. And I'm not going to be surprised to see some adjustments happening here. And it's really trying to watch it. And it's hard to do because it's shipping is such an isolated field that it's very hard. Like you said in the beginning, it's like, I don't know what's going on. How is this going to impact me directly?
And so for a lot of it, it feels like, the situation in the Red Sea and then also the Panama Canal has sort of sucked the oxygen out of the room for a lot of maybe other, or maybe I'm not sure. Are there other shipping stories that we should be also paying attention to in addition to these two big ones?
Well, I would argue that you're not seeing the impact of them very well. So, for example, we got ships piling in up off Savannah right now, and we usually see ships off Savannah, but that number's starting to grow quite a bit. And we're seeing some containers not arriving as it should be. So for example, a lot of the container ships that go through the Suez into the Mediterranean hit a couple of ports and offload their cargo. Well, that's not happening. So what you got is ships coming around Africa, going into Tangier or Algeciras in Spain, offloading. And so you're seeing the kind of the influence of that. The ability to get an empty container is going to be tight all of a sudden. There's a finite number of containers out there. And if you're expecting to have an empty container to load some cargo that you need to haul from the US outside, that may get tough. You may want to grab a container now because they're going to get tight. Most people, I don't want to lease a container early. I don't want to pay empty lease to have a box out of my yard. It doesn't do me any good. It's like, well, if you can't get it in a week or two or a month or two, you may want to be paying a little bit extra to have it here, because all of a sudden there's going to be a shortage about that. I think what we're seeing right now is the focus is so much on these big things. I'll give you another one right now. When you have a problem hauling in the short distance like what we're seeing, what do people do? I got high priority cargo. I got to ship it. I'm going to put it on air. How much is air freight right now clogging up? We've got shortages of aviation fuel. How much is that aviation fuel price going up? Because aviation fuel has to be refined. It has to be distributed. Well, aviation fuel, I'm not going to load a load of aviation fuel in the Middle East and sail through rockets to bring it to Europe, because I'm on a floating bomb. We're going to sail this around. And so what happens when we start seeing aviation fuel going around? I saw a story just today that every Jones Act tanker, these are the tankers that move oil and fuel around the United States because of the Jones Act law, are booked for 2024. They're all booked. So, if you've got a fuel issue, for example, if all of a sudden we have a hurricane, because that never happens, if we have a storm that shuts down refineries and all of a sudden we don't have gas in the pipelines, or, something happens in Florida that, all of a sudden everything shuts, that's going to cause a disruption, probably amplify it more than I previously knew. So, if I'm a trucking firm, is it better for me to keep my tanks pressed up at my facilities to fuel my trucks? It probably is at certain times, because disruptions could be more prevalent now than ever before.
So it's almost like this entire conversation is just I guess a kind of an awareness level of if you weren't already paying attention before, you should be paying attention now, so you can get ahead of some of these things. I think you had just mentioned that you had some commenters that had listed these concerns and made those preparations in advance, so they're kind of avoiding some of these overage fees.
Yeah, we all use just-in-time logistics. We all do that. I mean, I don't have, a year's worth of food in my house. It's week to week. Some commodities, I'm just going to do it. It's just-in-time food. I'm just going to do that, and that's the way we operate. And, which is fine, but the way the global supply chain, especially on shipping, works is there's not a lot of slack in the system at times. And when you cause disruptions, it takes time for the system to catch up. And when you disrupt it by a couple of percentage points either way, it has ramifications and it just resonates down. There was a debate about, well, everyone's going to file into the West Coast ports right now. Well, no, they're not, because there's a lot of issues about coming into West Coast ports that still exist that they want, even though the rail companies are sitting there saying, we want rail freight, we'll take it, tomorrow, bring it in. We'll do it. There's still a lot of hesitation about going in because there's a lot of variables going into California ports, with terms of drayage and trucking and labor issues. So, you have those kind of hesitations. And again, I go back to, there are people who watch this every day and they're really important for you in the supply chain to know this. If you're, just a regular routine shipper, you don't need to be watching this, but you need someone who does it for you all the time.
So if Sal is president of the world,
Oh man, it's a great title.
how
That's good. It's good. I'm liking this. I'm liking this already.
how are you fixing these two big issues that can hopefully, alleviate some of the other, I guess, ongoing pressures that typically exist in shipping?
Well, again, it's hard to make it rain. I mean, even as president, you can't make it rain, and so you do have climate issues. It's redundancy and taking lessons that we've learned. My fear coming out of 2020 to 2023 and COVID and the supply chain crisis is, okay, we saw a lot of things go wrong. Have we fixed them, or have we even acknowledged that they're a problem? What are we doing to fix those problems? We talk about infrastructure in the United States all the time. If you look at the $3 trillion infrastructure bill, how much of that went into ports? Almost none. It was a fraction of a percent. It was very minimal. There's got to be better ways to do it. You need to have some redundancy in the system to be able to do it. There are choke points. Choke points are always going to exist. There are these little areas that you can't get away from. I mean, and in truth, Bab el-Mandeb and Suez is a lot better of a choke point than the Straits of Hormuz, because that's a cul-de-sac. If you close the Straits of Hormuz, you can't get out of there at all. So you have to have it. You have to react quicker. I think one of the flaws that the U.S. did, and the world, and it's not just the U.S., because this is really a world issue, is they didn't react quicker enough to the Houthi. When the Houthis started grabbing ships and they started shooting them, there should have been a quicker reaction to it. I think if you reacted quicker, that may have convinced the Houthi maybe not to be as bold at times. But when you react slower, they're going to keep ramping up, ramping up, ramping up. And now it's kind of hard to get them to back down at times. I think we got to look at how the systems function around the world. What we're seeing right now, at least on global shipping, is a reordering. We announced last year that the 2M Ocean Alliance, MSC, and Maersk are splitting in 2025. Maersk just came out and announced a new alliance with Hapag-Lloyd, the Gemini. That's a reorder. We're seeing shuffling going on, and the fear that we have is that we see a big reshuffling and we see a collapse of a container liner again, kind of like Hanjin back in 2017, which caused chaos for a lot of shippers around the world because their cargo got stuck in that system. We have to do some more things for more oversight and more visibility. I don't like regulation. I don't like sitting there saying that the government can fix things, because they can't. But I think visibility is one of the key things, and being able to put light to it. Why is it that the CEOs of these ocean shipping companies were not, called up sooner to talk about what's the plan here? How do we fix this? Because in many ways, when Maersk announced they're pulling out of the Red Sea, and then announced they're going back in, then announced we're pulling back out again. Okay, that's not an economic decision anymore, Maersk. That's a political decision. You are impacting foreign policy, military policy of countries. And, that's because you're a big corporation now, a big international corporation. You have a big power. It's very similar to almost like the East India Company of the 1800s. That's the power that these companies have. And logistics power companies can do that. they can do it. We're used to trucking in the United States, which is very small little firms, but ocean shipping is the exact opposite. It's behemoths. It's these massive entities that control 10 companies that control 85% of all the ocean shipping. That's what you have to see. And there are a lot of elements that need to be looked at. And the fear I have is that we regionalize shipping, that the global shipping common becomes a regional shipping area where you're just shipping between small areas. You don't ship outside those areas, and navies and nations become very protective of their shipping, and that means it gets very expensive to ship on the oceans.
So it's a lot of like, I don't want to say heavy topics, but I mean,
It's a
in some
lot.
instances, of course, that's very heavy. It's like, oh my gosh, how do we get out of this? But is it just a sense from like a historical perspective that all of these conflicts like this are always going to exist, and we just have to, as a human species, just sort of work to problem solve and work our way around them?
I think it's two things, Blythe. Number one, we don't see these things happen as much as anymore. Therefore, when they do happen, they seem to get more a disproportionate amount of attention. And at the same time, it's the fact that the Houthi, a very small little regional player, is having a global impact because you can reach out and do more because we're more intertwined, because we're more global, because we have more communication. I mean, the Houthi have communication. I'm gonna be clear. I get trolled by the Houthi all the time. I had a video. I'm not gonna kid you. I had a video that was copyright infringement of the landing of the helicopter on the ship, and I'm convinced it was the Houthi who didn't want me to use the video, and I won. I beat the Houthi. I'm the only one who's beat the Houthi on YouTube, but they have an influence, a reach that's kind of disproportionate to themselves. So I do think that we're in a much safer world, and perhaps we hype this up maybe too much at times, because what we're not talking about is the global system's working, trade's still working, goods, nothing has stopped flowing. It's going longer, it's being displaced. You're still going to be able to get your Stanley Cup. You're still going to be able to get everything you want. It just may take a little bit longer, which isn't the end of all things. Now, there are critical things that have to be shipped, and we may pay more through the nose for that. We may have to allocate it to air or expedited shipments. But in large, we can basically work through these issues. But it does make us more cognizant of the fact that we're much more intertwined than we've ever been in the past. There's this argument that we've been globalized since ancient times. Hey, we found Chinese coins in Pompeii. Okay, well, true, but it's not like there was constant trade between China and Pompeii. Now there's constant trade between China and Pompeii. You get it all the time. That is the element. So I do think we tend to maybe magnify the issue quite a bit because we can talk about it more. But at the same time, I think we can also be better prepared to handle it because we have better access to information and alternatives than we ever had in the past.
And I just wanted to add on to that, I heard a great comparison is that, yes, we are dealing with these conflicts right now that are affecting shipping, but we're also not dealing with the compounding efforts of what happened in 2020, where it was just this massive increase in demand of products. And so we're a little lucky that that demand is not there in order to further complicate all of these issues that are going on.
Yeah, because that was the issue. I always argue in 2020. We didn't have a shipping crisis. We had plenty of ships. There were 109 off LA. I could get you a ship. There was no problem with ships. The problem is that we just changed our ordering habits. So you had like the kind of quote unquote pre-COVID ordering habits, and then you had the COVID ordering habits superimposed on top of them. And the problem was nobody knew when COVID was going to stop, so you couldn't stop ordering the pre-COVID stuff. And so what we wound up ordering was kind of like two parallel, sense of goods at the same time. I always make the analogy that the toilet paper shortage wasn't caused by the fact we were using the bathroom more. We were using the same amount before as that. The fact was you were home 24/7 as opposed to being out half the day where you didn't use as much toilet paper in your house. There was plenty of single ply industrial sized rolls of toilet paper. But we're human beings, and if there's one thing we're going to pamper, it's our butt. And so we're going to spend a little bit extra money and get some 2-ply, 3-ply, and that's where you started running out. You could have got all the 1-ply you wanted. So it created that problem in the supply chain. You're right, we don't have that right now. The problem, but too, is what's that next black swan flying overhead that we don't see yet?
So, but before we get into, the growth of your YouTube channel and sort of the marketing side of things, I am curious to know, do you have, being a history professor and being able to talk about a lot of these stories with your students, I did want to ask one particular question. It says that this actually comes from my fiance. He's also a big fan of your content as well. But he asked, how much cross, if any, is there between the topics and the content you cover on your channel and the work you do with Campbell University? Do you use any of it as a basis for lesson plans? And what do your students and faculty think of your internet fame?
So it's a great question. I didn't know it came from your fiance, so that's great. I'm glad he asked that one. So two parts of that question. So number one, yeah, I use stuff like this in my class all the time. Matter of fact, it has helped me develop classes that I do in. So for example, I'm teaching a brand new course this semester called The History of Business and Trade, and we literally started that class off talking about the Red Sea. It was the exact thing. We're talking about global trade. We're using that example. We're going through a historical analysis right now of the history of business and trade. Plug a great book here, A Splendid Exchange, How Trade Shaped the World
I'm writing that down.
by William Bernstein. Great book. Using that right now. And so it's funny, we're talking about the Red Sea regarding to the ancient Egyptians right now. So it's interesting to see how that plays out. I've also used it in maritime security class I teach, in a maritime history course. So yeah, it does influence the way I teach here. So that's a big thing. In terms of I get a lot of attention for the YouTube channel. I really do. It's funny. The media people here at my university will always tell me it's like they have a thing that catches every time Campbell University is mentioned. They get a Google alert. And they say, man, it's like we dread when shipping things happen because it's just like nonstop you that come flying through. He goes, you get more hits than the sports team sometimes coming through. So it's a lot of fun. I think I get a little jealousy at times because I do get a lot of attention for doing this. But I got to say, my university is extremely supportive. I'm doing this for my office at school. So when you watch a video from me, I got Campbell University in the background. So they're extremely supportive in me doing it. They love the publicity. They really do. They think I get the word of Campbell out quite a bit.
Do you see an increase, but since 2020, where supply chain sort of became like I guess, more well known? Do you see an increase in interest in taking courses like what you offer?
I had it's so funny as I've had people outside the university say I want to send my kid to Campbell to take your supply chain program. It's like I don't have a supply chain program. Don't come me. I'll send them someplace else. It's like I know where you need to go, but don't come here because I don't have one. But yeah, I have students ask it all the time. We have a program here in Homeland Security, and I talk about Homeland Security, maritime security program all the time. And so that's a big one I push my students to. We do a course on critical infrastructure, and so I talk about ports and shipping and everything associated with it. It's always very interesting. And I think I've been really pushing my business school side to really push this more. I think supply chain is a great opportunity. We talk about it all the time and the potential and the aspects for it. What's really interesting is I got to say, as a historian, my undergrad was a BS in marine transportation, so I did an economic business, very logistics undergrad. But it's the historian in me that actually works a bit better, I would argue, because it allows me to synthesize a lot of information, to read a lot of things, and then to project it and to really focus my attention. I don't know if my business and logistics training really helped me with that as much as my historian training with that. And I joke because I deal with a lot of MBAs too. And I think MBAs are great. They're fantastic, but they also tend to be very narrow focused sometimes too. And I think historians allow you, one of the things I love about being a historian is I can look at something at the 500-foot level or go all the way up to the 50,000-foot level. And I could zoom in and out all the time. I think it's really helpful at times to do that. So it's been a really interesting mix what's been happening. It's been a crazy 3 years with this thing. I'm not gonna lie.
Do you have a favorite story that you like to tell your students? Like a
uh,
favorite shipping historical story?
I don't know if I got a favorite historical shipping story. I mean, I always tell them the story of the Ever Given because it's a great one. Because it's just, if I knew all it took to propel me into fame was that, I would have bribed a helmsman on a big ship years ago to hook a hard right in the Suez and run that ship aground. Because it was just, it's amazing. What I talk about with the students is this. I because I'm dealing with young students. I'm in a very kind of small to medium sized college. I deal with athletes a lot, and so we're talking a lot about right now about name, image, and likeness, which is a big hot topic. And I keep telling them it's like, listen, it doesn't matter where you are, you can make a name for yourself. It doesn't matter, you don't have to be at a big institution or a big university. You can be someplace like where I am right now, and do it. And I'll show them my video. That's my most popular video I ever did. It's got almost 1 million views. And I'll show them that, and I'll talk about the revenue I got from that. And I'll tell them right there, I said, that video took me, you look at the timestamp, 15 minutes to make. And I said, it didn't take me 15 minutes to make that video. It took me 30 years to make that video. It took a lot of elements to get to that point where you can sit down and for 15 minutes do this. And I said, that's what you need to understand. And so, my shipping thing I talk about all the time is when I was driving the ships, I had no idea about any of this stuff. All I cared about was, keeping the bow between the anchors. That's what I worried about, and not running aground and making the news. That's what I wanted to do. Now I understand the bigger picture, and what I try to do is make people in the shipping industry understand the bigger picture, because they don't. Lots of them, they just see the balance sheet. And same thing with people who are not involved in the shipping industry, make them understand it. So I think I don't really have a favorite story in regards to that.
Do you ever get scared of, powerful people kind of coming for you?
Oh, Gary Clay. I got a phone call not too long ago. I was on LinkedIn, of all things. I'm on LinkedIn, and I friended somebody. It's like I saw somebody. Actually, he connected to me, and I looked at it. I was like, oh wow, that's impressive. I don't want to say who it is, but it's like, wow, that's impressive. I mean, they're busy people, and they're really up there. And and all of a sudden I got that LinkedIn. It's like, yeah, hey Sal. It's like, oh, okay, and so I sent back. He goes, hey, if you got a few minutes, I'd really like to talk to you. It's like, oh God, I'm in trouble. It's like, there's no way I'm not getting yelled at right now, because I've been saying things. And it was the most cordial discussion. It was like, Sal, appreciate everything you do. It was like really impressive, and it's amazing. I think I've mentioned this to you before, Blythe. I've gotten contacted by people. It's like, are you kidding? I'm like assistant secretaries of in the cabinet level. It's like, hey, the secretary saw your video. I was like, really? It's like, why'd you see my video? And he's like, we really like your opinion and input on this. It's like, okay, I'm a YouTube. I don't like to use influencer, but I'm just a YouTube guy. He goes, no, you got a good handle on things. We're really interested on it. And I like to think that at times I have contributed a little bit with this, and it's amazing the influence you can have. You say this all the time, Blythe. I basically copy you all the time. If you're not on social media and using it correctly, you just don't understand. I tell every professor I ever do, it's like, man, you are an expert in this field that nobody else on the planet does. There's going to be a moment when you are sought after more than anybody else. And if you're not on social media, no one's going to find you. They're not going to know who you are, and you're going to miss out on that opportunity. You can't do it after the fact. You got to be on there to begin with, and you got to do good stuff, and then they'll come catch you.
What kind of opportunities has having a YouTube channel opened up the doors for you? I imagine speaking engagements, it may be a full-time income, all of that good stuff.
It's generated income, which is great. But I got a job offer not too long ago to go be dean of a school, which I unfortunately had to turn down. But it was an amazing offer. I was just like, we really love what you do. We want you to keep doing what you're doing, and come here and do this. Speaking engagements, I think every time I go in a speaking engagement that gets me from the channel, I'll always talk about it. I'll do a quick little short when I'm there. So I was in Vancouver, Washington, Vancouver, Canada, for a talk, because they saw a paper. I was doing a brief for the U.S. Transportation Command on global logistics in the Pacific, because of a paper I gave on the history of Navy tankers in World War II, because I posted it. And it's like, hey, come on, we want to hear you talk about this. And so I came on and I did that. I just got invited up to the Naval War College to come participate in an event. So the amount of events I get called to do and to ask for, my problem, Blythe, is I'm one person. I need to clone myself, because this is a one person operation. I joke all the time when I do my videos, like, I'm going to get my, if there was a mistake, I said, that's the staff fault. The staff is terrible. And the staff is my two dogs, it's Maui and Peanut, which you'll see in the background on some of my videos every now and then. But that's it. It's really amazing the connections you get. And I think you got to appreciate them and grab them when you can. And the hardest thing I've had to learn is to say no. Because I can't do everything. And if I try to do everything, I'm going to diminish what I'm doing. And so I've gotten to the point where at times I say, I'd love to help, but I just don't have the bandwidth right now to do it.
Oh, so that's how you answer the question, because I struggle with it too. I feel the requests coming in, especially with conference season coming up, and
Oh yeah.
it's very difficult for me to say no. So I imagine is it just as simple as sorry, I don't have the bandwidth, because if so, I'm just going to copy that line.
It is for some. It is for others. There are others like, man, I really want to do this. It's like, oh man, it's like this is what I really want to do, but it's like I can't cut loose and go to DC for 3 days to be in this event. And afterwards, I kick myself because like I should have cut loose for 3 days and been in the event. But you can't because it's either family or work obligations, or it's just you got something else going on. And so it's really really tough to do. But I think prioritizing is always an issue. We're always juggling this. I've got the flexibility to do this YouTube on the road. It's amazing. I've been able to come up with the portable studio thing where I can basically with a portable mic with my phone, and basically a laptop, and I'm up and running. I'm good to go, and I can, because I've also found out every time I ever leave like home base to go do something, something hits the fan. Guaranteed. Something's going to happen that something hits the fan. It's like, here's the story I'm missing right now, and I got no way to talk about it. So, I get more versatile with it. And I'm at the point where I'm, almost 3 years in now. I am thinking about, okay, I need some help. I need to do something here. And I also think it's an opportunity for some students to take advantage. I'm in a university. I'd love to get some communication students and maybe working with them and doing that. I think there's some great opportunities to make this a good learning experience for them too.
Yeah, heck yeah. That would, if I was a student at Campbell University, I would be the first one to sign up, because I said, I kicked the show off by saying I'm the president and founder of the Sal fan club. So, I guess, as sort of we round out this discussion, are there any creators that you follow within, the shipping industry or outside of the shipping industry that you draw inspiration from? Or are you just sort of head down focused on what you're doing?
So I got a trio of buddies who are naval historians, and they do very different things. It's very funny. They have a podcast they do together called Bilge Pumps, and so Drac Kinnenfeld, who does this naval history site that's just amazing. I mean, he's almost at a half a billion, half a million subscribers. It's crazy. Just puts out quality work. I mean, just really, he says he has a system and he follows it and he's really good with it. I got another buddy who does this, Alex Clark, who's a naval historian. He does these kind of stream of consciousness videos, which I love. And he talks about these very ingrained topics and everything. And then another buddy, Jamie Slidell, who does a kind of a video series. It's called Armored Carriers, where he does aircraft carriers in World War II. But it's not him. It's literally images and videos and basically primary sources talking. And I remember when I started all this, I talked to all three of them because they all had three different models they were using. And I talked to all three of them, and they were great. They were really supportive and helpful. And one of the things that I've really loved is and this is there's a community in YouTube where we can kind of help each other. So, I'm a firefighter. I got very much involved with the shipboard fires that took place up in Newark, New Jersey. I've been watching the testimony this past week of the Coast Guard hearings. And I had a buddy call me who's got a channel, Stash D Training, which does firefighting training. He said, "Hey, I've never done a guest before. Why don't you come on and we could talk about this lithium ion fire up in Dutch Harbor, Alaska?" And I did. It was great. I love doing that. Buddy Ward Carroll, who does a naval history, a naval YouTube channel. He's an aviator, so he talks about all U.S. Navy stuff. He had me come on. He goes, "I don't understand this commercial stuff. Come on and talk to my audience." And it's great because we feed off each other's audiences. So I love those comments where all of a sudden you get this thing. It's like, "I saw you on Ward's channel. It's great." It's so funny. It's like the guest star you never expect to see, on your TV show. So yeah, I get off a lot of inspiration from you. I mean, Blythe, you helped me when I got started with this, and I remember sitting there in some interviews with you, like, "Oh, this is good stuff. I'm going to write this down, and I need to do this stuff." I mean, so there was always, when I started on Freightwaves, it was great because that really hooked me up with a good little group of people at the time who were doing their own shows and starting to really venture off this way. Because this is a complete lark for me. Again, I never expected to do this. This is not what I expected to do. And if you would have told me in March of 2021, I go back again. I go back to that day, March 21st, I think it is, 23rd, March 23rd of 2021, when Ever Given One Ashore. I had 136 subscribers, and the day before, 3 people watched my channel. That was it. That's what I had. And I did like the first video, me and John Conrad from G Captain, about an hour long talking about Ever Given. I think we got 3,000 views. I was like, 3,000 views. It's like insane. This is like ecstatic now. It's crazy. And then, back in June, I had a viral video that went crazy because we were covering the Titanic and the submersible that went down. And then the amount of calls on a daily basis that I take for granted now. I was just talking to Reuters earlier today. I got asked to write an op-ed for the second time by the New York Times. It's crazy. It's just what you can use this for to get your message out. And again, it's got to be a quality message. If you watch my videos, it's not high tech. It is not a video that is a lot of art in it, a lot of graphics and everything like that. This mug and maybe some pictures thrown up, maybe some maps of marine traffic. And I joke about it because I just got like on a Canva to like change my thumbnails now. And I'm like very proud of myself because like, okay, and which is very funny because my 15-year-old son keeps telling me, it's like, oh, they're terrible, Dad. You got to change these things. And so, I get a lot of inspiration from my 15-year-old son, Christopher. He's the one who tells me all the time, like no, this doesn't work. It's like too wordy. You just make it simpler and everything. And every time I ever
think, in your thumbnails.
What's that?
I said I have noticed an update in your thumbnail
design.
I know. It looks good.
And every time I get like really cocky in my YouTube, he will come in with his phone, pull up a video and say, okay, here's a potato chip rotating. It had 3 million views. And I'm like, okay, that's it. I can't compete with that. And so it's very humbling right off the bat and everything. It's like, it's not that good.
So what do you have planned for the YouTube channel? Is it just sort of just plugging away as, these topics arise, or do you plan content pretty far out, or what does, I guess, sort of your planning strategy look like?
So I try to have in the back of my mind, because these new, the problem I have is if I chase news stories, they go away. And then all of a sudden, what do you have behind it? And so like right now I'm doing a series on the U.S. Merchant Marine. So I'm looking at different shipping lines, trying to get a video out a week on that, trying to be very consistent. Consistency is one of the keys. And I'm trying to be much more consistent with that. So putting some background content in there, which for a YouTube channel works, because if you're very news driven, then you're going to peak and trough. You need that kind of steady little base at the bottom that's getting people in all the time. So I'm working on that. That's a really good one for me. I think that's a really solid one to do. I'm looking to really kind of get into a cycle of, okay, this is when news stories are going to come out. My problem is I am driven by the news cycle. So sometimes I'll be like, okay, a video a day for a week because there's a lot going on. Other times it'll be like, okay, every, Monday, Wednesday, Friday or something like that. I'm just going to try to get on a cycle. Do longer content ones on the weekend. I like to, have a kind of a longer one on the weekend that goes a little bit more in depth. And I've been pretty good with that. I have a series called What the Ship, where I take like 5 top stories, break them down over 30 minutes. And then the last kind of 5 minutes each one. And the last 5 minutes is, okay, how do these all tie together? And, those I love to do. They take the longest to do, but they're always the good ones because they get a lot of feedback on those, because a lot of people will look at them and say, okay, that kind of gets me up to date. They don't have time to watch all these videos. And so, it's measured. And I really want to get to a point where I can get some help and develop it and make it so it's a little less on me. And I can focus a little bit more, but it's tough. It's hard to juggle, especially when you have no guidepost to go by.
How are you balancing it all?
I thrive in this stuff. I really do. I like being busy. Busy to me is the way to go. If nothing's going on, I turn into inertia rock. I don't move. It's just like I turn into a slug. So this has been great. I love it. This keeps me going. It's a very big passion. I have a lot of them, as you mentioned before, I'm a volunteer firefighter. I do stuff with the athletics here at university. I'm a chair in my department. I got a 15-year-old son. I got a family. It's a lot going on. But I think it's really, my family's been really supportive. They've been really great at this. They've had to deal with craziness. It's like, okay, something's happened. I got to be on TV at 2 in the morning for India, and so I'm up, in a shirt, tie, jacket, and pajamas, doing the standard thing we do. So, they're really good, and I love my wife for putting up with me with this sometimes, because it's crazy, because whenever something happens in shipping, she's like, "Oh, here we go." Here's the phone. Here it goes. It's like, say
Batten
goodbye to
down the
dad for a few.
hatches.
Say goodbye to dad for a few days.
All right, last couple questions. What advice would you give to a YouTuber that's just starting out?
Number one, don't get discouraged. Don't look at your numbers. Don't sit there and say, Sal's doing this and I'm doing this, I should give up. I remember when I started doing it, I was like, oh man, I'm making enough for groceries for this week. It's like I was like so excited. It was like, this is great. And just focus on what you want to put out there. Don't go over the tip of your skis. Don't talk about things you don't know. There are subject matter experts out there. And also understand you're going to be wrong. One of the things with historians I deal with all the time is historians never write a book because they never want to put their writing down on paper for fear that someone's going to come back a week later and say, you're wrong on that because I just found this. And you got to get away from that. So when Ever Given happened, I actually got called by CNN and the Washington Post to write pieces for them. And that was some of the toughest writing I think I've ever done, because it's like it had to be quick and fast because this story is going to go away. You got to get it out before the ship is free. So we need this tomorrow to get it done. I'm doing this right now with the New York Times, the op-ed. You got to get it done. And so, you got to put aside your preconceived, this is the way things worked, and try new things. And don't be afraid. Don't be afraid to be wrong and everything. I tell people all the time, I get notes on my videos. That's wrong. It's like, great. What's the right answer? And I'll highlight it on my video, and I'll pin it to the comments. And if I need to, I'll cut it out of the video. So, don't be afraid of that. And most importantly, find the thing that you like. I thought about a YouTube channel before this. I actually, during COVID, I was working with a history organization and we were doing interviews. So I was like, oh, hit naval history. I could do a naval history channel. But there's a lot of them out there. There's a lot of people doing this, and I'm going to be competing against them. And then I thought, well, I'll do naval stuff. It's like, there's naval stuff too. And then I found my niche, and that was commercial shipping. It's like, nobody's talking about this stuff. This is great. It's like I found my one little lane, and it's like, okay, this is my lane. I'm going to take it. And off I go running. And what I find too is I find people who are doing things kind of similar. So there's a lot of guys out there and women out there who are recording themselves sailing. And it's like, okay, I'm not going to do that, but I'm going to bring them on to my channel, and they can talk about it. And I'm going to promote their channel, and they'll promote mine, and this will be great. We'll feed off each other. And that's the thing. Don't be afraid to ask. That's the other thing. Is like, everyone I've ever encountered, I've never had someone. I'll see someone who used something on their video. It's like, hey, what'd you use for that? That's great. It's like, oh, here you go. No one's keeping anything proprietary. It's like, this is what we want you to do. And I'm really amazed about it. I did a two video section on a 60-minute segment on the U.S. Navy, where I took the entire 60-minute segment, cut it in half, and I just kind of overlaid me on it. I was like, there's no way this is flying. There's no way I'm not getting copyrighted hit by 60 minutes. I did. It's like 60 minutes flagged it. And I put in an appeal saying, okay, this is fair use doctrine. And I've changed it substantially. And son of a gun if they didn't approve it. And I said, okay, well, that's amazing to me. And then last week I got called by 60 Minutes because of the Red Sea. And they said, Sal, we wanted to talk to you. It's like, oh, okay, great. 60 Minutes. Like, Like, I was wondering about it. And the first words out of their mouth was, hey, we've enjoyed your videos a lot. I was like, really? I was like, seriously, you did? He's like, no, we really did. We thought they were really constructive. I was like, okay, great. He goes, matter of fact, that's why we're calling you. We figured you'd know this. So, don't be afraid to reach out and go that way. Because I think what keeps everyone back is being discouraged. And those low numbers, nobody's watching. I'm not getting anything. It's a lot of work. I'm not getting anything out in return. Man, that changed for me. And it changed for me in September of 2021 when I shifted from talking about a ship stuck in the Suez to talking about the global supply chain issue and the arrival of ships off of LA and Long Beach. And that is solely because I had a viewer sit there and say, Sal, you should branch out a little bit and talk a little bit more than just this ship stuck in Suez. And I was like, it's a good idea. I should do that. And then I had a lot of people, subscribers and Patreon members, who gave me a lot of great advice. And it's like, okay, you guys do know what you're talking about.
What kind of advice was that? Just different topics to cover and things like that?
Yeah, there's a whole variety of different things. How to change your Patreon page, what to do with that. How to change. Okay, you're doing this in your video. It's really annoying. Don't do that anymore. It's like I had this really like long introduction to myself. It's like, oh God, no, I don't need that. You need. My son said, gotta get into it, Dad. Gotta 15 seconds. You gotta be the quick preview. Because that's what people are doing, scrolling on their phone. You gotta have action in your first 15 seconds of your video, and so a lot of things. I change that, change the format a little bit. It's so funny because sometimes I'll do like these really long videos. I'm like, I know it's gonna like this, and I'll get that. It's like, oh, dude, you drone on for too long. It's like, okay, this is not TikTok. If you want a 30-second TikTok, go to TikTok. This is going to be a little bit different. And I've had people say, no, we like the long format. Go that way. And I listen to the people who watch me because I think they do it. And there's some, there's some who've been there for a long time. I've known them for a long time. I don't know who they are, but I just know their handle. And so when they drop you a comment every now and then, it's like, oh, that's a good one. I'm going to listen to that one. I appreciate that. And then, it's I got the shtick with the Hawaiian shirts, which I wear Hawaiian shirts anyway, so it's like it's great. And every now and then when I wear a new Hawaiian shirt, I get more comments about that. It's like, oh, I hadn't seen that one yet. Where'd you get that? So it's a lot of fun.
Yeah, I think you are the perfect example of a creator that had a wealth of knowledge about something and then just decided to just start creating. And then you just evolve as you go and you pick up things along the way. And a lot of people want that instant success right away, but they
Yeah.
don't realize, how many reps and how much self-awareness it takes to continuously, watch yourself and get better and listen to some comments and know which ones to avoid and which stories to cover and which ones to avoid. It comes with time. That it's not really something that can be taught.
Yeah, and YouTube is a great medium too, because if you read that hurtful comment comes up, it's like, oh, that's hurtful, delete. And then you can just move on. It's great. It's a great feature. It's just you can't do that in real life. Sometimes you just can't do that. But here you can. And sometimes I leave them. It's just like it's fine. I don't like to delete comments at all. I really don't. It's just if it's really spiteful, mean, and derogatory, and it's hurtful to other people, I'll
Or it's
do
a
that.
hoothy.
But yeah, but when it's they comment all they want, they're fine. I love that comment. But it's just how you develop and again, be willing to listen and change because you haven't figured it out. If you're like me, Blythe, and you go back and look at a video you did 2 years ago, you're like, oh God. It's the same thing about writing. I do the same thing when I read something I wrote like years ago.
Same.
It's like, oh, I would have done that so differently now. I just kind of cringe at that at times. And so I just keep developing and keep moving and keep changing and you try new things at different times too. See if this works, and then like, ooh, no, that did not work at all.
Well, it's definitely been a joy to watch over the last few years. You're definitely that example that I look to as far as, hey, YouTube is probably the home for a lot of our content that we create, and we should invest more time and energy into it. So thank you for being that beacon of reason, I guess, in this crazy world of content creation. Where can folks follow you, follow more of your work? What are your social platforms of choice? I don't think it's TikTok, but I'm pretty sure it's Twitter/X
Yeah,
and
I,
YouTube.
I, I do. Well, it's so funny because I am thinking TikTok and I've done a few of them and I really need to get better at that. That's really one of the things that I want to bring somebody on that can take a video and put it into a TikTok. Because I think that eats up a lot of my time, and it's like,
Mm.
okay, maybe if I get somebody to do that, that'd be more efficient. But no, I'm on Twitter a lot, X, whatever you want to call it, at Mercogliano S. Obviously, YouTube, what's going on with shipping, which has all my links there. I've got Facebook, I'm on Instagram, I'm on LinkedIn, you name it. I joke with my students all the time. If they can't find me, they're just not trying hard enough. Because I'm pretty much out there everywhere. And I want to thank you, Blythe. Seriously, when we started talking very early on, I appreciate it. I remember how many of the talks we had are like, oh man, Blythe has got all these great ideas. I need to be listening to them. I tell people all the time, it's like social media is your friend. If you think it's a problem, you're not using it correctly. And for businesses, I just don't understand how they don't I really don't. I went to a conference not long ago where these shipping companies were complaining I can't get young people interested in it. And it's like, you're not out anywhere where young people would know about this. Do a video showing these kids in sailing around the world. I guarantee you'll get interest in it. It's like you're crazy. There are some guys that do that and women that do that, and I love talking about them because they can do things that I can't do. They got a big ship for a backdrop, and so it's great, to do that.
Yes, I 100%. First of all, thank you for the nice comments.
Thank me.
But then second of all, I would echo that statement because we had a woman on the show. She's a merchant mariner and she's the captain of a ship, Gabby Salazar. So she is
Oh yeah.
still to this day one of my best performing videos because
Yep.
people love to learn about these different career opportunities.
And Gabby's great. I mean, she's on Instagram. You can follow her. She's a beautiful girl, but more importantly, she does this. She's so funny because she goes from this really kind of picturesque, beautiful woman, and the next thing she's in coveralls and she's working on the ship, and she's just like, boom, it's like go, and she travels the world, and people love that. She love, one of the things that she emphasizes the fact that I could work for 2 months out of the year, then I got 2 months off, and it's great, and I'm going to go everywhere because I make good money, and I'm going to go travel, and I can do it. And Gabby is just fantastic about that. And I've been highlighting a lot of those guys and women who do that because I think it's really important to show them and let people know what it's like. Because again, it's too easy to think that my goods just show up on a shelf and there's nothing behind it. Whether it's a truck driver, it's a guy on a railway, it's a female captain driving the ship. There's a lot involved with this.
Well, I think that is the perfect place to end this discussion. We went, I thought we would go about this length, about an hour and a half, 2 hours. I was hoping that you would be okay with it because I had a slew of questions. You answered all of them flawlessly. So Sal, thank you so much for joining the show and your time. It's very appreciated.
Blythe, when I talk about telling people, I don't have the bandwidth, you will always have my bandwidth, Blythe. There's never a problem with that. I will make bandwidth time for you. I appreciate what you've done, how you've helped me, and especially your audience. So thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. The feeling is mutual. So thank you, Sal.